Alright, hello everybody. So welcome to our next lesson here and kind of talking about our next kind of topic here, African Americans in Colonial America. So our objectives and standards to analyze what life was like for African Americans in different colonies and to understand the impact African Americans had on the colonies. And please take a moment there to read the standards if you would please. And our desired result. How were African Americans treated in British colonies? So let's talk about the colonies in the South first. So we're talking about places like Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Those are considered the Southern colonies, okay? So the strongest hold of slavery took place in the Southern colonies. And this is mainly because economies were ruled by plantation systems that had large profitable estates based on slave labor. The South was also known for growing crops such as tobacco, rice, cotton, and indigo, which is a blue dye. And these crops are very hard to grow and hard to harvest. So labor to these crops was difficult, like I said, and slaves did most of the work. Now, the demand for cotton and other crops will keep slavery strong in the South for many years. There were a few slave revolts in the Southern colonies as early as the 1660s, but many of them were not overall very successful. So slavery will continue in the Southern colonies for many, many years. The Middle colonies, we're talking about places like our state here, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and New York. So although slavery was not central to their economy, it was permitted. And most economies in the Middle colonies were based on trade, and there's no plantations really in the Middle colonies, so slavery really doesn't find a foothold here. But slaves in the Middle colonies typically worked in construction or factories, such as lumber camps. There were also slaves that were highly skilled in the cities that were masons, meaning working with stones and buildings and things like that, shipwrights, working on ships, goldsmiths or glaziers. Now, also in the Middle colonies, there were indentured servants, which typically worked for businesses more than slaves in the Middle colonies. So colonial opposition to slavery. There were many people in the colonies who were opposed to slavery. Again, for example, in Pennsylvania, we have the Quakers and the Mennonites, who are religious groups that published anti-slavery literature. And the first official protest to slavery came in 1688 by a group of Quakers. Residents in Germantown had been appalled at the thought of Christians owning slaves. So this will begin to set in motion protests against slavery, and later this week we'll talk about the formation of anti-slavery groups. So New England colonies and slavery. Places we're talking about are like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Maine wasn't a colony, it was part of Massachusetts at the time, but the northern part of our country there. So in the New England colonies, there was very little slavery. Now, if there was slavery, it was slaves typically worked in building houses or structures in cities. Now, slaves still faced restrictions in the New England colonies, but less so than in other areas. In the Middle colonies, and especially in the Southern colonies, slaves had very few freedoms, if any freedoms. So New England was a little more open to giving them rights and things like that. For example, in some cases, slaves were paid allowances and they could gather together to socialize. Slaves could also participate in certain community events, such as elections in some places. And one of the big people who was an opponent of slavery was Reverend Cotton Mather there. You see his picture. He was a strong anti-slavery advocate in the colonies as well. Alright, so our closure for today. Think how African Americans were treated in the British colonies. Think about the different colonies, such as the Southern colonies, the Middle colonies, and the New England colonies. What were some of the roles they had? What was some of the work they were doing? And that will help you answer your question. Alright, I hope you have a great rest of your day or night. Please let me know of any questions or concerns, and I hope to talk to you soon.